Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for giving up some of your evening today. I know it's always difficult at the end of a working day, or is this the beginning of a working day for you?
It's towards the end of a working day, but I don't keep 9 to 5 hours, as you can imagine. So no, it's my pleasure to be here, mate. Thank you.
And what kind of hours do you keep when you're about to launch a project like Fully Loaded, 96-page all new graphic novel that launches, well, today as this interview goes out on the 21st of February?
Okay. Yeah, my schedule is the same. Obviously, I've been a little bit busier, mindful of the fact that we do launch today. But I tend to keep more or less the same hours, which is 7 days a week. I don't work as late into the evening as I used to when I was younger, but I start early. So my day starts around 6 a.m.
Wow.
Yeah, and I usually work through till around 7 p.m. with breaks and
Of
lunches and
course,
stuff,
of
obviously.
course.
So yeah, it's quite a long day. As you know, comics is quite labor intensive. There's a lot of work that goes into comic, especially if you're doing everything yourself.
Well, particularly the level of detail. I mean, I was talking to Mike Perkins just the other day, and the level of detail he puts in. He was talking about his Batman First Night project, which
Oh, I've
he's
seen a lot of that.
drawing, and he's
Stunning.
it's quite amazing. But he's drawing on twice the size of his usual pages. So for him,
Really?
one page is taking 2 days, even though his mind is trying to trick him into doing one page a day. Now, are you finding on this that you're upscaling your artwork at all?
Um, yes and no, because without getting too involved into my sort of working process, because I think it'll be boring, to be perfectly honest. I don't draw complete pages. I draw individual panels separately. In fact, I draw
Okay.
individual characters and figures separate from backgrounds. So I'm surrounded by bits and pieces, loads of different elements, and then I collate them and compose them on screen. So none of the, although it's all hand drawn with pencils
Right.
and ink, none of the pages actually exist as complete entities. So I can draw it at whatever size I like. Obviously, you have to be mindful of the fact that if you draw something at a good size, quite big, and then think, well, I can just reduce that down and use it as a smaller element on another page. It never works. You've got to draw for the scale that's intended. You know,
Right.
you can always tell if something's been blown up artificially or if something's been scaled down. You know, you think, well, you know, you've got a really big face in a big panel, it's a big dramatic shot, and then you've got sort of a similar panel with the same sort of face and character, but he's smaller with other elements, and you reduce that face down, it never looks right. You've got to draw it twice.
Right.
You it's just it doesn't work. Even with all the computer technology and all the filters and all the stuff we can use, you can just tell that you've cheated. I mean, it's not cheating. It's not cheating, but it's not convincing. And the
Yeah.
whole point of all of this is that it should be convincing. But it's fascinating that you say that Mike Perkins is working twice up with some of those pages. I'm kind of not surprised.
Mm, I know, it's amazing. Even looking at the covers, I think he's released all three covers, and you can tell that it must be on a bit. And I know Liam Sharp also works on larger pages, one of which I'm very proud to own from his Green Lantern run.
Right.
Now, is this a process that you've always had when you come to approach comics, or is this maybe a hangover from your time working in graphic art and those years before entering into the wonderful world of comics?
Yeah, bless you. Yeah, I've always worked this way, but these days it's easier because we have computers at home. Before, it would have been photocopies and paste up and cow gum and spray mount and all that stuff. But now we don't need to do that because we can do that virtually. So it's always been part of my process that. So I don't do layouts. I don't do thumbnails unless I'm really running behind
Right,
with an editor and they need something so the letterer can get started,
I'm
which
with
does.
you.
Otherwise, I just draw all the elements and all the bits that I think I need. It's probably not the most efficient way to work because I end up with way more art than I can actually use or even need. But I
Right,
like
of
the
course.
flexibility. I liken it to editing a film, but although it's not filmic as such, because I can move things around, and I have a vague idea of how I want the scene to look. But if I suddenly think, well, actually, this will be much better if that foreground character was much bigger, as a sort of a framing device, so it's a compositional thing. I, I'm at liberty to do that because all the elements exist separately. A little bit like old-fashioned 2D animation, where backgrounds and figures and they build
Yeah.
it up in additional layers. So I've been doing that for years, and I thought I was the only one that did it, but I found out relatively recently that Howard Chaykin works exactly the same way.
Really?
Yeah, he does these days.
Okay. Right.
And I didn't steal it from him. I've steal a lot from Chaykin, but I didn't steal that.
He's
So
always been a bit of an innovator, I think, Chaikin, anyway.
I think so. I think he's been he like Corbin, another big influence on me. He was so far ahead of the game. He was
Mm.
just waiting for technology to catch up with him, and now it has. And now it's just like, the floodgates are open. So he's so prolific. I mean, notice how much work he does these days. For a senior gentleman, he's really productive.
And I'm very pleased he's really productive. I think the world would be a quieter and sadder place if Chaikin wasn't producing some very evocative and some very thought-provoking work as well. I think he can often be misunderstood in this day and age. And
He
I think,
often is, yeah.
and certainly, I think in the past people have misconstrued the words his characters say for the words that he say. And I think he's had some flack in recent years because of that.
Yeah,
And
I think he has. Yeah, because
it's such a shame.
I know, because without getting too far down that particular rabbit hole, be here all night. But we seem to have forgotten that this is fiction, and fictitious characters within stories don't necessarily reflect the author's view.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have despicable people who say despicable things. It doesn't automatically mean that the author is on board with that.
Agreed.
Now we seem to be at a point where, well, we can't have, even the villains can't be too villainous, because that might make a certain demographic uncomfortable. Or, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, Chaikin's having none of that, and neither am I, to be honest.
But I suppose that's where creator-owned becomes a huge bonus for any creator that wants to go down that route. And I get the feeling with Fully Loaded, you're embracing your love for neo-noir crimes like Blade Runner. I mean, you say it in your PR, think Blade Runner meets Sin City.
Yes.
And of course, those gritty gumshoe stories that, we did grow up in. We all that same era as me, where maybe on a Saturday afternoon before or after play away, you'd actually get some crime noir thrown on without any thought. This is a day before scheduling was a thing.
Yes.
And some of the films I stumbled across by sheer accident that, like you, must have cast very long memories for when you came to start thinking about Fully Loaded, I suppose. So I suppose if there's a question in there anyway, would I be right to say not just Blade Runner, but those black and white film noirs are a huge influence on this new graphic novel?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite films is Orson Welles' Touch of Evil.
Yeah.
They say it's the last real film noir, because it came at the end. Obviously, film noir started in the 40s, and this was sort of like late 50s. And just visually, and in terms of the complexity of it, and it had a real edge. It was dark and it was sinister. There was nothing quite like it. The studio hated it. And, Wells was always sort of pushing the envelope, even when he was out of the spotlight. He was an outsider on the inside.
Yeah.
And I can really identify with that. And I kind of flatter myself in thinking that I'd like to assume that role. Obviously, without the bloody genius and the talent, I wish, But
so is this how I'm going to introduce the interview? The H.G. Wells of comics says.
Well, you could do, yeah, or the outsider on the inside.
Yeah. I always, because I'm a big fan of H.G. Wells, and I always remember his story behind Chimes at Midnight, which is one of my favourite films, where he takes all the Falstaff scenes from Henry IV. But he told Spain at the time, "Oh no, I'm filming Treasure Island," and he wasn't. I always found that quite fascinating.
Yeah, it was this incredible. He was this sort of sort of Hollywood superstar, sort of wonder kid,
Mm,
genius, but really he was an anarchic, underground filmmaker who suddenly had, the whole world at his disposal, and then they took
yeah,
it away. Then they took
yeah,
it away from him because he was dangerous, because he had ideas and
and wouldn't
ideas,
compromise.
yeah, and he wouldn't compromise, and that terrifies production studios and things. And I don't think things have changed that much since, unfortunately. So I see him as a kindred spirit, well, a definite inspiration.
Yeah.
Uh,
And did
yeah.
you go back to those classics, or did you have a very firm idea in mind of how you wanted to tell this particular story over 96 pages? Because there's some, again, it's that level of detail. I mean, one of the pages I'll be sharing in the video is that amazing presentation of Manhattan, the whole sprawl of that. I mean, how the hell do you approach something like that and not die from a lack of sleep?
Well, good reference is the answer. You sort of collate it from various sources. If you're drawing a real city, then get pictures of the real city.
Yeah.
I'm amazed how often, even today, and I won't sort of name names or mention comics, but I was looking at a story. It was meant to be London being attacked. I'm thinking, the artist who did it, I thought, have you even left the house, let alone looked on the internet? I think that you think that's London. We have no excuse these days because there's so much material available.
Yes, of course.
So I mean, it used to be back in the day that we'd have an approximations of locales and things, but these days the reference is there. So it's
Mm.
about getting the correct reference, and if it's meant to be New York, make it look like New York. So yeah, where did I start with that? I mean, I found some pictures that I liked, and then I based it on those. Then I picked up my brush. It was all done freehand with the brush. The trick to doing buildings,
Yeah.
if you want to make them look okay and not like technical illustration, is do it freehand. So no
Wow.
rulers. Yeah, the spread you talk, if it's the one I'm thinking of, was all inked freehand with a brush.
You
Yeah.
must have a very, very steady hand, Jimmy.
Oh, I used to.
Well, obviously enough for this. That's quite amazing. But I
Enough for that.
suppose the main character who may or may not have a very passing resemblance to a certain Jimmy Broxton. I'm
Oh,
assuming
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm assuming that's intentional, wanting to put yourself into a story that clearly takes the great love you have of film of crime noir and also the modern classics like Sin City and Blade Runner, and sort of put them into your own frame of mind and tell your own story. So I suppose this is where the hard sell begins. Tell us more about Carson Blake and also the origins behind the story.
Okay. Yeah, I can do. Yeah, in terms of his appearance, yes, he does have more than a passing resemblance to myself, but that's purely convenience because the character is of an age, and it's suitable that he looks a bit like me, but he's not a self-insert. He's not.
No.
I'm not put myself as such into the
If
story.
people didn't know you, he's a very appropriate looking kind of gritty
Yeah,
gumshoe. He
yeah. He's
is.
meant to be. He's meant to be a middle-aged man, I guess. Who, the fact that he looks a bit like me is not really the point.
No.
If I didn't look like that, I wouldn't be basing him on me. So that's it's not a red herring, but um, some people I'm sure will pick up on that, but it's not really that relevant. So
Right.
it's not a self-insert in the modern sense where writers, and there's nothing wrong with it, they literally insert themselves into stories
I know you
where
mean.
they become
Yeah.
almost a fish out of water type thing.
This isn't
Purely
meta.
it's a visual thing and a
Yeah.
reference thing.
And if people didn't know you, Jimmy, I don't think they'd bat an eyelid anyway. Like I said, it's a really well cast character, and I got it straight away. I got it
Good,
straight
good.
away.
That's good. I'm really pleased to hear that. Yeah, but in terms of the origins of the story, it's complicated. I'm not sure how much I dare say, just purely for the sake of boring everybody senseless. But it's the story itself is based on a number of ideas and themes that I've had kicking around for a good few years, to be
Right.
honest. And it goes back to a drawing I did maybe 3 decades ago of of a sort of a mournful, lonely-looking, private eye type character on a balcony, sort of looking out, looking a little bit sort of lost, with a futuristic sort of
Right.
sci-fi background with all the architecture. And I did an illustration of that. It was like a sample piece when I was trying to break into comics many years ago. Lost now, unfortunately. I wish I still had it.
Mm.
No idea where it is. But that image resonated with me. That idea of this sort of lone figure lost in the big city, if you like, but with the future technology,
Mm.
has always been with me. And I put it not on the back burner. It was always there, but I'd sort of not sort of based anything I was working on that image. But it was never that far away from my thought, and I never necessarily thought I'd come up with anything. But oh, how can I don't want to get too sort of metaphysical about this, but early. Oh, I'll tell you. You know, you can
Why
always
not? I've read some Andrew Marvell and some
edit.
John Donne. I know metaphysics when I hear it.
Okay, you can edit this out if you think it's too much. But early last year, I became very ill.
Right.
I mean, seriously ill. I was hospitalized, and I was hours away from not being here. Right,
Wow.
the Reaper was sort of tapping his watch. You know,
Mm.
um, obviously, I'm still here, and I'm very grateful, and people looked after me. When I came on out of that, on the other side of all that, and it took months, I was a different person. I don't know what happened. You know, I'm making no, supernatural claims or anything.
Yeah.
I'm not religious in any way, but something happened, and then I started to get these ideas, and these things would start to happen, and I'd get these dreams. The entire story for Fully Loaded came to me in dreams. I'd wake up in the
Wow.
morning, the idea was there, and I was just dictating
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
It was. I've heard other people say this. Maybe this is where ideas come from. It's all a bit of a mystery, I guess. But the whole thing sort of popped into my head more or less fully formed,
Wow.
and I was just taking notes. Seriously, and it still happens even a few months on, as I've sort of done like half the book now, 50 pages are drawn or whatever. It's all more or less written. But a couple of days ago, I had another weird dream, and I woke up with a new ending. So I've changed the ending.
Have you really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
it's not a
interesting.
it's not a million miles away from it.
Okay.
I knew what the ending needed to be, but I didn't know how to arrive at that point, if that
I'm
makes
with you.
sense.
It does
And
make sense.
I had this dream, and there was the ending. I thought, right, okay, then. So I just made notes, and that will be the ending now. So it's really weird. So I don't think prior to this period in my life right now, I don't think I would have been able to do this, which I think is why it's been kicking
Right.
around for 50 odd years. Suddenly something happened. Maybe it's partly as well. If I don't do it now, maybe I never will. You know, none of us are
Yeah.
getting any younger. You know, as I say, I don't want to get too bloody mystic woo woo thing about this, but something, and even the artwork and the art I've been able to produce is different to what I could do before.
Really?
It's
Okay.
yeah, and other people have said,
Right.
"Wow, you've up your game," or "You've done this," or said very nice complimentary things, which I'm very appreciative of. But and I think it's surprised a few people. But you know what? It surprised me as well. Why that's
Wow.
happened, I
That must
don't
be a
know.
nice feeling, surprising yourself. It
Yeah,
must be like looking back at a piece of work from maybe 5, 10 years ago and kind of forgetting that you did it and going, oh, actually, that's a lot better than I remembered.
yeah,
Because I
that
know
happened
you
a lot.
artists are the first people to knock yourself unconscious with sort of like being your own worst critics.
Yeah, and I am my own worst critic. And I heard a phrase the other day, which I'd not heard before, which is imposter syndrome, where you think you're a fraud, and you think, well, I'm in this position, I'm very lucky, and it's great that I'm getting this attention, and people are willing to publish all this stuff. But I'm thinking, well, they're obviously not in on the joke, because I shouldn't be here. I really, and I've always felt like that. I have, even though I've been doing this for a long time and other things prior. I thought I've always thought one day somebody's going to sort of say, "Yeah, hang on a minute, we've rumbled you, mate. You're not the real thing," and I still think that to a certain degree. So yeah, I am my own worst critic. I'm never happy with what I do ever.
But
Uh,
can you afford to be your own worst critic when you are both writing and producing from start to finish this graphic novel? And I dare say, now that you've got the Zoot campaign up and running, the clock is ticking. You mentioned 50 pages, assuming you've then got another 46 pages to go.
Yeah, indeed, I have. Yeah, so there is a lot of work there, and it's daunting, but I'm halfway through it, near enough.
Yeah.
So I've every reason to suspect that I should be able to finish it, but it's fluid. You know, things change. Like the ending changed 2 days ago. It didn't change, but it evolved. It's a creative process that's constantly evolving.
Right.
But I love that. I like the danger of that. See, it's not set in stone.
Yeah.
It's, well, you know, you're creative yourself. That's how creativity works. It
It
isn't,
is.
you know, prescribed. It's a fluid thing, you know, and I've not felt that before. A lot of the stuff I've done before, obviously, I'm working with scripts from great
Yeah.
writers. I've been very fortunate to do that, but because, as you say, I'm doing all of this myself. So there's always a danger that you can't be indulgent, you know, and you have to edit yourself. You know, you can't think, well, I like rockets. I'm having a
Put them
rocket.
in.
There's no rockets in this. You know what I mean? So you've got to, that was you know, an exaggerated example, but you do have to rein yourself in a little bit. But there's an internal logic to things if it's right, and I think this is right. Well, I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
And how?
Yes, I'll find out when people read it.
Well, yeah, but how do you script yourself then? If you're coming this first and foremost, possibly as more of a creative artist than a writer. I mean, I mean, you mentioned there's a few tweaks and a few evolutions. Do you follow a particular, like the Marvel House style, or are you more rigid about the scripting, or just scripting as you go along, having a loose idea of what's on each page?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of all of that, really.
Right.
What you just said. There certainly isn't a complete, what they call a full script, because that's just too much time. You know, that I'd be wasting time. But there's a plot that's worked out in terms of where the story goes from A to B, beginning, middle, and end. Excuse me. But I think in terms of scenes. So I write scenes, and when you've got enough scenes, you've got a complete work. I mean, David Lynch used to say, you know, you write 70 scenes, you've got a film, right? So I don't know how many
That's
scenes.
how he does it.
That's how he does it. Oh yeah, well, it's David Lynch though. You know, yeah. He can, you know. So, like I say, because I don't do thumbnails, I don't do layouts, but I do have. I know the story, the arc that the characters go on, mainly the main protagonist. There have to be certain scenes that obviously set up the plot, but also we explore him and his personality. So I know what needs to be done in terms of moving that story forward. So, and that comprises of scenes. So I've got all the scenes more or less worked out, but I'm not entirely sure what order they'll be in, because because of the way I work, I can sort of edit them back and forth. So I how do I come up with a particular page? It's never a particular page. It's usually a particular scene. So, for example, I haven't actually drawn any of these pages yet, but I'll tell you that there's a scene fairly early on where the main character, he stops at, you and I would call it a petrol station, but in America it's a gas station, because he's going on a bit of a journey to get to a location that he's suddenly realized he needs to be at. So that's about a 4 or 5 page sequence that is relevant because he needs to get fuel, but it also elaborates on the world, the state of the world. Because obviously this is not present day, it's near future.
Yeah.
We need to establish how things have either gone wrong or changed, whichever, depending on your opinion. And this particular scene at the gas station, it's not exposition as such, but it's relevant. So I know that scene, for example, is relevant to the story.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's a post-it note somewhere in the corner, the gas station
I'm
scene.
with you.
And I've got a few sketches and a few little notes of dialogue. So I know what that scene is and I know what it needs to achieve, but it's not written, you know? It won't be written in terms of dialogue, captions, etc., until the artwork's done.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense to me. And then the words come to fit the scene, to
Yeah,
fit the mise en scène. I totally get that.
that's, I mean, they used to call it the Marvel method or the Stan Lee.
Yeah.
So when the art's done, like I've just done a scene which was like a sort of a, I'll call it a gunfight in an alleyway. So I needed that scene because I needed to establish that Carson Blake is a complete badass, not to be fucked with, even though he's a middle-aged man.
Yeah.
So I swore then. I do apologise.
Is badass even swearing these days?
Well, I said fuck. So I think that's still swearing. I'll say it again. I won't say it again. So that
We're all
scene,
over 18 here, Jimmy.
well, indeed, aren't we just? So that's a sort of 4-page sequence which establishes a certain aspect of his character because we hadn't seen it before, but it flows naturally within the story. But the
Right.
dialogue isn't written yet, but all the artwork's done now. I have notes for dialogue, so when I come,
Yeah.
you know, the writing, the final writing of the dialogue is when I letter it.
I'm with, yeah, of course. And then, yeah, I mean, it makes total sense because you might, like, say, if you have a sudden dream tonight, you might go back and change the whole sort of atmosphere of a scene, mightn't you? And
Yeah,
then
I might do.
suddenly the dialogue has to change. But I like the
Yeah.
fact that you've got to keep notes of dialogues because no one's memory is that good over
No,
a
my memory is
96
not that
page.
good.
But I suppose, I mean, we've got 10 minutes left. So what I really want to get out of you is, I suppose the next two questions to me is, in a nutshell, what's the story? Although I do know people can read the synopsis on the campaign page,
Yeah.
which we'll have in a link accompanying this video. But also, we talked off camera about how great Zoop is as a company because it's a bit more pick and mix than Kickstarter and Indiegogo, for example. So it's a two-pronged question. The first of is, what's it all about?
What's it all about?
And also, why Zoop? Because I
Why is
know
it?
Shane, Scratch Comics, through which Verity Comics is an imprint, has used Zoop before. I know we've interviewed the guys behind Zoop, and we just feel they're really, really genuine guys. I hope I haven't answered your question for you, but I certainly got a good vibe off them.
To a degree, you have, but it's all good because I'll answer the Zoop aspect of the question first. They're comics guys, you know. They're into comics, and they're if you want to call it a platform or a crowdfunder or whatever you want to call them. At the moment, it's not exclusively, but it's mostly comics or comics related. So that really gives them a focus. So their database, their sort of mailing list, and their growing reputation is very comics focused, you know. And you're seeing a lot of, you know, big name, not the likes of me. I mean, big name people.
Yeah.
Books through them, you know, like Chaikin, and there was that wonderful sort of, John Paul Leon tribute book, the Midnight. Not the Midnight Men, I forget the name of it, but the Midnight Soldier or whatever it was, you know. So
the Winter Men, yes.
Not very good with titles. I do apologise, and no disrespect to John Paul Leon, who I knew.
No, of course not.
Amazing artist, and so they've really got their sort of finger on the pulse, I think, with regard to this is comics.
Yeah,
and they're quite hands-on. You know, they get involved in terms, not necessarily the creative decision making, but in terms of how you can present that, how you can market that, and how that might tie in with other things, and even other campaigns. Whereas with something like Kickstarter, and I've been involved in many Kickstarters over the years, that's just whatever, you know. What's your project? Doesn't matter. It could be a comic or it's a real catch-all. But Zoop is pure comics at the moment. I hope they kind of, I think they may have plans to expand into maybe games and animation, and they probably should because there's some money there. But at the moment, they're focusing on the comics, and I think that's why it's attracting, you know, serious comics people.
I agree. I was impressed with.
Yeah, sorry.
I was impressed with Nick Pitara's axe wielder John. I don't know if
Oh,
you've come
geez,
across
yeah,
that one.
absolutely. Oh, God, yeah,
Fantastic.
absolutely incredible.
So I'm with
Incredible.
you. I've really do like Zoop, you know,
Yeah,
and as you said, it is very comics orientated. They do feel a lot more. Again, I can't say about Kickstarter, Indiegogo, but I just get the feeling because they're smaller, they're more accessible. They're more ready to be there for you if you've got a question to answer, to
absolutely. Yeah,
ask us.
they are. Yeah, they are on a smaller scale thus far. Yeah, but it's where their heart's at. I
Yeah,
think, and that's not. I mean, no disrespect to Kickstarter
no,
or
no.
Indiegogo, but they're they're a really broad church, whereas Zoop is very focused, and I hope they keep that going, really. So, and they're such nice guys as well, and they know their stuff.
Yeah.
They're really on the ball, which are very professional and very friendly, which that's all we want, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. And now I've done this a lot of times when I've done podcasts with Shane. We always forget to ask about the story up front, and it's
Mm,
usually the last question, which is where
that's
we
okay.
are now. And of
Yeah, the
course,
story.
it's often the last thing people hear that stick with them. So I suppose in a roundabout way, we're doing a good job. So who's Carson Blake? What's the story? Morning Glory. Over to you, Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, Carson Blake. He's obviously the I wouldn't call him a hero. He's the protagonist of the story. He's a he thinks he's retired.
They always do.
Yeah, we always do. I mean, a hired gun for, call it the mob, call it the underworld, whatever. A bad lot.
Yeah.
Prior to that, he was special forces, so the usual thing, the cliched stuff. So he can handle himself and he knows what he's doing. But he was out of the game. He's forced or coerced or because of a sense of duty back into the game because a friend or a dear friend who once saved his life is in trouble. I don't want to say too much.
No, don't say too much.
Yeah, he's in trouble and he needs Carson Blake's help. So Carson Blake gets back into the saddle, back on the saddle, as it were, and embroils himself in the world that he once knew.
Right.
He's on a quest to track down something. It's kind of a MacGuffin, but it's relevant because there's more to the proceedings than meets the eye.
Right.
That's very important. So he's on a quest to obtain something for the bad guys who are not blackmailing him, but coercing him because his friend's in trouble. They're threatening his friend. And then Carson Blake obviously reacquaints himself with the underworld that he was part of before. And of course, what you've got to remember is that Carson Blake is 100 years old.
Right.
He doesn't look 100 years old.
No.
That's kind of the point, but he is 100 years old. So it's set in 2065.
Okay.
And he's 100 years old, but he's still only looking 40 or 50 or whatever. And
so he's alive the last time England won the World Cup, effectively.
Just about, yeah.
Just
it was one, yeah.
Do they win in the future? Maybe you could write that in, Jimmy.
That's a good question.
So he's the least stinkiest arsehole in a world full of arseholes.
No, he's a complete arsehole,
right?
But his heart's in the right place. But he doesn't suffer fools, obviously, and he's been around for 100 years, so he's really seen it, done it, and he's got the t-shirt. But he is at core a decent man in a very indecent world.
Yeah.
Obviously, the world is 40 years from now, and it's like 40 years worse. It's like the worst excesses of everything that's wrong now is worse then. So it's the usual dystopian stuff.
Yeah.
But his age isn't just a thing that you can just sort of say because it's amusing. It's very relevant to the story. The events in the story that start, there's a reset at the start where the global elite, the authorities, the people we all need to be sort of very wary and scary of, create this event, and it resets the planet and we end up with the even worse dystopian nightmare than we've had
Okay.
enjoying now. But something else happens as part of that, which is sort of unknown. And that's where his backstory comes from. His backstory won't be explored too much in this particular book, but that's the next book. His
So
origin story.
plans for more. Plans for more. And
Definitely.
we'll probably have to leave it there because my time is nearly up.
Oh
So,
gosh, sorry, I've been rambling
Jimmy,
on.
no, do you know what? It's been a lovely half hour of just chatting about comics. I might need to
That's why
actually
we're here. We love
upgrade.
comics, don't we? You know?
But I'm sure I'll catch you again. I'm going to thank you now, Jimmy, because I've got less than a minute left. And see you in the funny pages.
Absolutely. You too. Thank you so much. My pleasure. All the best, mate.